Welcome back to the Peggy Smedley Show, the podcasting voice of IoT and digital transformation.
Welcome back to the Peggy Smedley Show. We are coming to you live from CES 2019, and as I said, day 2. And I am sitting here right now with Ravi Puvvala, who's the CEO of Savari. Ravi, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Peggy. I'm really excited to be here.
We have said that this show right here in the North Hall seems to be the automotive show. We've been talking a lot about connected vehicles, and that's actually what you're going to talk about because that's what you guys have been doing. You've been in business now, what, about 10 years now?
That's right, Peggy. We started the company in 2008. This is our 10th year of operation. We're pretty excited about, we finally see the technology is actually getting into production cars.
So it's exciting. When we talk about autonomous vehicles right now, there's a lot to be talking about. When you talk about vehicle to X and things like that, Ravi, give our viewers and our listeners really a good insight. We've been talking about the importance of it, but why do you see the view of this? Because I think there's a lot of different perspectives about saving lives, being the convenience of it, but what is your view of it from a company like yourself? What do you see the importance of it?
Sure. Today's cars need to have multiple redundant systems, right? The most advanced sensor technologies they have is the cameras, radars, and LiDARs actually build the foundation for the self-driving cars, right? V2X is all about what the cars cannot see. There is no other technology that allows cars to sense information or potential vehicles or pedestrians, and this is the only available technology that is there, right? Because we use the radio as the fundamental sensor, and it's focused on allowing cars to talk to each other. When we talk to each other, there needs to be a standard way of exchanging data. Once the data is received, that data is used for crash avoidance, right? And this is all about, making cars safer to drive and saving people's lives.
So when we think about that, is it the car that's right in front of it, the car that's 2 cars behind, 8 cars behind? How are we talking about that radio that you talk about that they can't see and things like that?
Sure. The radio technology is being, it goes back into what the cars have today, right? Today's cars have cellular radios as their primary means of communicating to the internet, yeah? But these radios can also be leveraged to allow them to talk to each other. What we mean by that is the technology has gone through a transformation calling Cellular Direct. That means that I can use the cellular communications to exchange data between cars. And, which means that I'm not using my subscription, I don't need a SIM card, I can do this freely for the purposes of crash avoidance.
Are there some real challenges in connecting all of these vehicles today?
Sure, it's a cooperative sensor, right? When you talk about cars talking to each other, all of them have to happen at a time where this majority of the cars have this technology. Otherwise it becomes one-hand clapping. Right? So in order to make a cooperative sensing technology to work, you need a collaboration, a framework of when the auto OEMs are going to instantiate this in their cars at the same time to get the maximum benefit, right? So the history of the last 10 years has been the government pushing this technology rather than the automotive OEM saying that we need it right now.
So do we have regulations that we're following? Because that's something I've been asking everyone. Is it an industry, when we talk about connected vehicles, that we need something that's regulated to ensure the safety and security of what is a connected, autonomous world that we're talking about?
Sure. I can talk from the perspective of the U.S. U.S. Department of Transportation have nurtured this technology for the last 10 years. They spent probably about more than $100 million of taxpayers' money to begin the framework of why this is going to be mandated in every car. Yeah? So they built the technology, they standardized it, they created a certification framework. The leaving legacy of the Obama administration was to make this technology part of every vehicle. Last few years, the Trump administration has been against mandates. They want the industry to take the leading position on what the technology will be adopted by the automotive OEMs.
So are we at a struggle? Is that what you're saying right now? We're one hand's not following it. We're not continuing that.
So I would say the V2X is outside the hands of the government mandate. We do not believe the government is going to push for a mandate. They are going to let the auto companies pick what's best for them. So there are 2 competing technologies in the market space. The government's job is to allow both of them to have a fair play. And now it's up to the marketplace to decide what they want to give the maximum benefit for the consumers.
So what do you think is the best thing that needs to happen? When we look at this, partners want to work in a society that's best, safe and secure. They're not necessarily looking to fight it out. They want to see where the best partners can come together and solve critical business issues, because they know in manufacturing it never helped to have their egos come to market. It never succeeded. So they understand interoperability is the best way to go. So I think we have an industry that gets that.
That's right. The industry has definitely achieved the universal standardization of what data will be exchanged. We go to US, Europe, China, there has been cross-pollination of harmonization of standards, that the data exchange is going to be understood, well accepted. The question of the debate is what radio mechanism is going to be used. It's kind of like, VHS versus, a Betamax. Okay, there were two different types of video formats. It's also like Little Indian or Big Indian. I think the industry always comes up with two types of polarities. It's up to the industry to figure out what's right for them. I think in the V2X world, we have two flavors of technology. One loosely based on the Wi-Fi standards, and the second that is based on the cellular standards. Now it is up to the car makers to do what's right for them.
So do you see the cellular standard right now, really struggling, or is popular? What are you suggesting right now in those cellular?
Sure. I think the cellular standard has only been available in the last 2 years. It's actually advancing leaps and bounds over the Wi-Fi based standards. So the Wi-Fi based standards was what the governments and the OEMs were pushing in the past, but now there's more momentum for the car makers to use the cellular standard for many reasons. One, the existing car market, today there are about 30 million cars that are capable of connecting to the network over cellular, and the new cars are also getting integrated with more and more cellular technology. So if you look at the common base between the old and the new cars, the business models are more ripe for the cellular technology to move forward.
Well, let's talk about this announcement you made earlier I think it was earlier this week. Talk about that a little bit.
Sure. As I talked about the transformation from the Wi-Fi based standards to the cellular based standards, we partnered with Qualcomm, and in the last 18 months, we have done number of demonstrations around the world. We started off the 2018 with a big demonstration in Washington, D.C. to prove to U.S. Department of Transportation and FCC the technology is ripe and mature. The second thing that we have done is to move to Europe, and we worked with a lot of the OEMs in Europe to showcase the technology can interwork with the existing Wi-Fi based standards. And the third thing that we did is go to China and demonstrate that we as a company, Savari as a company, is able to interoperate with a lot of the local Chinese suppliers, and we are the only non-Chinese company which got certified in the China market. So from the OEM's perspective, when they go to a supplier, they're looking for a single supplier that can meet the demands of US, Europe, and China, single supplier that can do two different types of radio technologies, a framework that they can take it to a global market.
When you look long term, what do you think is going to happen with connected vehicles and their standards?
The standards are going to define the framework for the marketplace, right?
It's very much so, right? We're going to have it.
Right. Once you have a standard data, I think the struggle the industry is having is, you take the case of any telematics modems inside the cars, they're all proprietary. Whether it is GM or Ford or BMW or Hyundai.
But go on with that, but look at those standards as they relate to how you're going to connect to all the other things, all the other voice-activated things that we're doing in the home, all the other connected artificial intelligence items. Don't those all have to connect as well? I mean, aren't those standards going to have to come into play as well?
Not for the purposes of what we are focusing, right? What we are focusing is about what is the data that is going to be coming out of the car that is going to be standardized, that other cars would accept. Right? Of course, there's a lot of other data that every car is generating related towards autonomous cars, related towards your sensors inside the vehicles. But
isn't all that data going to have to be harvested together? Aren't we going to have to make sure that the bad guys aren't getting access to all that data at some point? So you have to protect all the data from everywhere? I mean, aren't those operation centers going to have to maintain to make sure at some point data isn't interrupted, so that there's some giant accident, right? I mean, you have to look at all that information from wherever it's coming to make sure it's secure and safe so that those connected vehicles are safe. so that nothing is interrupted at any point of the communication?
We do not make the data exchange as critical part of the running of the vehicle, right? We only make technology to work better. Like today, you have radars and cameras technologies to make lane change warning. Using this technology, we only make the lane change warning to work better. Of course, there are a lot of non-line of sight scenarios that I mentioned, which can only be covered with this technology, right? But if you do not make this technology to work, it's as good as not having it. So it's not going to disrupt the function of the vehicle. The second point is that once this data becomes standardized and they see incentives, it becomes a marketplace for two types of customers. One, the safety customers like the insurance companies, because when you build crash avoidance technologies, the ultimate beneficiary is the insurance company.
So they'll give discounts and things
That's
like
right.
that.
It becomes the kind of the framework of usage-based UBI, usage-based insurance. And the second data marketplace is about Googles and Amazons of the world who are trying to get a foothold inside the car. They're looking at, okay, how do we take the data that's inside the car for them to provide incentives, to provide a coupon to the end user, to provide more access to the marketplace. How do I buy a good on my Amazon store? How do I make my as you mentioned, the smart home devices be activated from my car if I want to?
So those companies are going to have to ensure the security of all the things because they'll be the ones who are providing access to all that information.
That's right. So V2X defines the standard framework, right? It does not have any tie with the consumer. It does not take away your VIN number. It does not, the data coming out of the car has no way tied to you as the driver, right? They have ensured the privacy of the consumer is the utmost important when we are building safety technologies. When you look at beyond V2X data, there are all types of data that the car generates. That's where the privacy issues comes into play.
So the large companies who have access into this information, whether it's Google, whether it's Amazon, whoever those companies are, they're going to have to ensure. But what if there's an unknown entity that comes into play? How do we ensure that that company, because right now we don't know if some new player is going to come in, right? How do we ensure as a government they are going to have to regulate this? So at some point there will have to be regulation to ensure that unknown entity, because technology changes exponentially. Right now we're saying Google, Amazon, whoever. How do we know there's not going to be a third unknown player who pops up that you and I don't know about?
I'm just coming out of a panel discussion this morning on data is the new oil for the automotive industry. I want to kind of bring out one viewpoint that came out in the panel discussion. This panel discussion between Trillium, Savari, and other infrastructure players. So the perspective that was put up was when the data is standardized, the consumer has to be empowered to have the ownership of the data coming out of the car, and they get to choose who are the end companies that get access to the data. So if I am the consumer, if I have control of what data is being generated and I get to say, hey, I provide this data access to Google or Amazon or insurance company because I see an incentive. If not, I shut off my data access to every one of them.
But does the consumer have enough knowledge to know who to trust?
I think
we saw it. We've seen how many companies have been hacked already. We all thought we trusted them and they've been hacked. And so what does the consumer know later down the road? We've seen what's happened to Target and Marriott. Those are viable, intelligent corporations, yet there's bad guys out there who can still hack the best corporations in the world. So there's no guarantees that even the best companies, we've seen Facebook, we've seen some of the best corporations be hacked. So what's the insurance? You're saying, well, okay, the consumer has to take it. Well, there's no guarantee.
Today, the car has become the next generation smartphone. If you look at the end licensing agreements, you have millions of end user license agreements that no consumer has time to read, but they have to accept it. I think same goes with the car, because if you look at my smartphone, I look at my data rights, it takes a very smart user to turn off the data access.
Do you think a user reads any of these privacies?
I think
not really. They don't,
for sure,
Ravi. They don't read them.
But the problem is the fact that you have used iOS as your framework, Android as your framework, you are getting into a mechanism. If you don't, your data is going to be compromised without your knowledge.
Well, I mean, we look at this down the road. We can only hope the companies we work with are doing their best due diligence, having the tenacity to do what they're supposed to do. But you can't put the ownership on the consumer, because the consumer's never going to do what they have to, because they don't have, it's not realistic.
I think that's the nuances of the technology that we use. If we use Microsoft operating systems, if we use Android operating systems, if we use iOS, you get the good and the bad of using those frameworks. The car industry is the same way. It comes back to the framework that you use, right?
Agreed.
Right?
Agreed.
So you bring in the good and the bad parts of the technology. Technology is kind of a double-edged sword.
Yes. So looking at it right now, what are your objectives for Savari going forward? What do you hope to see with the partnerships you look to develop?
You know, we are very excited about getting into production vehicles in different parts of the world. We believe China is going to lead the marketplace, especially in V2X, because they have their regulations, they have their data standards, you know, at a much faster pace than the rest of the world.
You think they're going to beat some of the other companies that are down out here in data standards?
I just give you certain statistics, right? You know, today there are 300 car makers in China. And if you look at the number of car companies are increasing day by day, you just have the government and the industry is bidding on more players. Even if 10% of those companies are successful, I think they have a very good chance. I think it's all about probability. So if we have few companies, I mean, if we go to Big 3 in Detroit, if only 3 companies are producing cars in the US market, and if there are 300 car companies are producing the same technology in China, you know, there are more companies competing for it.
And will all of that information be secure?
You know, that's a very interesting data point, and I think that's where we see a lot of the global politics come into play. You know, US government restricting the access to companies like Huawei, you know, getting into the US market. So I think this is kind of where the market, the economies of the world are defining who is allowed to play into the core infrastructure of what we do.
It's going to be an interesting time. Ravi, Puvvala, CEO of Savari, thank you for being with us. We look forward to learning more about what you're doing and continuing to talk to you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
All right, so where can our listeners go to learn more about your products?
Oh, Savari.net. Our website is Savari.net. We have a lot of videos posted. You know, we keep our consumers and customers updated about a lot of events and technology that we're bringing out every day.
And you're exhibiting right now at the Westgate.
Westgate Pavilion, and booth number is 2201.
All right, thank you. All right, listeners, we've got one more guest coming, so we're coming to you live from CES. This is the Peggy Smedley Show, the podcasting voice of IoT and digital transformation. Remember, with great technology comes great responsibility. We'll be right back after this quick break.